And we're going to go from table to table and ask the facilitators what the 3 or 4 top issues that have been constructed by the table are. And as we go, if you've heard an issue before, don't repeat it. So we should stop by about table 3, we should be out. So Warwick Waters, Warwick, you're a facilitator of our first table, so what are the 3 or 4 kind of key points that came out of that wonderful table?
Thank you, Steve. So our first one was just a comment around a challenge for each of the trials to have a clear outcome in mind and to be able to articulate what benefit or what tool's going to come out of each of the trials.
Yep.
Second one was the challenge around managing transition from where we are now to where we want to be in the future. And so I suppose articulating a bit more about that, where we want to be in the 5 years' time and how we're going to get there.
As an as an agricultural industry?
In each of these trial areas.
In each of the trials? Yep.
And the third one, it was just raised the opportunity to link with other organisations or projects which have similar objectives, and they're out there, so there's opportunities there.
Thanks, Warwick. That's fantastic. So clearer outcomes, managing transition to a future 5 years out, the opportunity to link to other organisations. This table in front, I'm sorry to say this table, but Maureen?
Thanks very much. So what do we have?
Did you have any similar to that? Or
A little bit, but we did talk about the need for early scoping and the need to have early scoping and to have the right people and very broad engagement in the early scoping process of the trials.
Yep.
And yeah, especially it's critical to have the right people and the right stakeholders in the same room to map out the issues. We also spoke about links between the trials. At the moment, there's really only University of Melbourne that's the only sort of people that go across all the trials. I know MLA is involved in a lot of them, but different people. So that's another thing that can be we can get more out of having a better link between the trials.
Yep.
And the last one was for the third trial. Picking up on Bruce's point, thanks Bruce, to look a little bit more about the business pathways. We're looking at the people pathways, but what are the pathways for the businesses to employ people and get new people into the businesses, into the future.
Thanks, Maureen. That's fantastic. So again, these are going to be fed into the trials and hopefully we'll expand them and make them more effective. The table on the front?
Yep, we just went through 3 of the trials. We didn't get to trial 4. So these are just comments from the group. Trial 1 on the processes. Comment was that processes see delivery of extension services as a competitive advantage, as a way of attracting growers to, I guess, provide produce to their process.
Yep.
For trial 2, thought was that as the next generation comes through, we're going to be a bit more familiar with apps and mobile phones and so on, that this might solve itself to some extent.
Yes.
But then maybe in the future the consultant will be a bit different from what they are now. They'll have greater technical skills and I guess digital skills and perhaps slightly less of the people skills. Going to trial 3, I guess contradictory to what I just said, the feeling was actually that maybe we need people skills, that people like to learn from people, not from machines or algorithms. Yeah. And another comment was the one-on-one mentor-to-mentee approach is actually pretty time-consuming.
Yeah, they're terrific. It was just apropos of nothing. There was quite an article on 7:30 report last night where algorithms and computer programs are now replacing judges and juries. So there's a real discussion in the legal kind of community about how far that can go and how accurate is it and what the future is and how we deal with it. So a really active discussion about the replacement of judges and juries. So next table out the back, Bruce, your table.
Yeah, Bruce Hancock here. Yeah, we re-rated the various trials, and trial number 3, Sally, came out on top across this table here, closely followed by trial number 2. And so discussions revolved around trial number 3, and strongly believe that skills will drive the technology development. So skill and capacity building is important. There is no definitive pathway, in consulting, and the government sort of stopped being the training background of consultants, and so there is quite a hiatus in that space that will potentially need to be addressed. In trial number 2, the Precision Ag one, appeared to be little consultation and consideration of engaging with the producers, the end user of it. And I think that probably cuts across all the trials. There's a bit of an assumption that we are working with the designated service providers, and we believe there's a connection to the producers, but we just need to test that, because that may not always be the case. And I guess in trial 2, concern around who owns the data. As big as it gets, there's lots of discussion in that space. Might be bigger than this trial, but it's going to be a fairly important one.
That's great, Bruce. That's good. So far we've had virtually no overlap, Neil. So Mark, your trial, I can only see your table or Jeff's table. Who's facilitating there?
Actually, Tim's speaking on our behalf.
Yeah, good on you, Tim.
Okay, so I've been dobbed in for this one.
Yeah.
We started from a position of it was such a quick introduction across that we didn't have the detail ultimately to go into a lot of substantive commentary on how would you improve the implementation. You just didn't have it this afternoon. So that made this a bit of a difficult exercise, and we didn't go through and then rank each one and say which we thought was going to be better than the others. We did think all of the topics were right and significant and positive, so that was very good.
Yeah.
The critical issue then for each one ultimately is how does it achieve an outcome and impact? How do we shift the needle? What do these things do both as individually and then within the collection in terms of testing the results of the survey and providing that ground truthing that actually makes a difference? And that is the big question from this table.
Yeah. So that's a good point, Ruth. Ruth very quickly writing all of these down. So that's an excellent point. And Ian, your table in there, Yanni, you're facilitating, or?
So it's me. Ian Tarbotton from New Zealand. Some of the things we talked about is try and embrace the whole psychology dimension of change in the trials. A lot of people stuff and stuff going on in heads, so try and tap into that a little bit. Looking back, looking forward, is it about tracking what's happened historically or some interventions going forward? We just weren't sure on that. And if it's going forward, are you looking at incremental change or step change? And just be clear on which you're going after. And the whole importance of tracking trust and engagement of the people in your various trials on the way through in quite a sort of rigorous way, because most of them are at quite an early stage. Trust will be pretty low. So is that going to flatline or decrease or build? And as it builds, you might get more momentum.
Absolutely. They're really good points again. Thanks very much. And Ross, can we go to the table straight behind that? Or any table. Choose a table, Ross. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Look, we covered off on many of the points that have been talked about.
Okay.
So this question of outcomes.
Yep.
There was a question about are these trials,
Yep.
Which I think came up before as well. The fact that there's probably similar activity in other projects that are occurring, so the use of potential case studies. There was an observation about some incongruence here between the language in the trials of being commercially driven, private sector focused, needs-based, demand-focused, but also the language of applying R&D, which sort of is a hallmark of the organisation and the funding system the project was birthed out of. So it kind of touches on the stuff that Lawrence and Mark were talking about a bit, that there's a disconnect in some ways between the process that creates projects like this and the reality of trying to execute the project. And we were trying to discuss, it was an interesting discussion because there was sort of real merit in the trials, was the discussion and the topics, but there was something not quite right, and it's hard to identify what it is. And potentially it relates to that it's framed as a demand driven or a pull thing, but there's an element of strong push in there as well. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that was just an observation.
That's great. That's great, Sean. I think that's true. But out the back, Ross, I'll let you handle this table selection from here on in, Ross.
My name's Jeff Minchin. Some comments from our table down here. The digital project, just a comment, were the RDC digital strategies referred to in building that project, and they may see some use in referring to those. A question around, do we need to ask, will the consultant be replaced in the digital disruption? So a comment that Tom made there before. We also had some comments around skills required for future consultants across probably for all projects. Was are we getting the right training, and will the graduates have the necessary skills for the future? Just touching on that digital media that we're getting through an extension and research development. Need to consider the changes or changing roles and skills for the future. I suppose that's similar to what we just said. And just on the processor project is there a disconnect between the processor needs and the farm management or consulting? The processors need to have a defined role to minimise the confusion in the market, was the comment.
Thanks very much, Tim. That's now, Ross. Well done.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Gordon Stone on behalf of our table here. So we investigated the first question, which was those 4 trials. And our answer was that all of those have promise, but it really depends on the future aspirations of an industry or a sector or a group. It comes to thinking about what new knowledge they want, what new culture wants to be implemented, what common interests there might be that have a commercial focus and potentially an institutional focus. So if that was the answer to the first question about those trials, the next discussion we had was, well, how does this model to do with the private sector contribute to all the other extension models out there?
Yeah.
And our conclusion was, well, surely it fits, but then where does it fit? So we were trying to figure out a bit about the fit. That led us then to think about some other concepts about the importance of relationships, the capacity to build relationships over time, built on a range of motives that support continuity, and one of the particular things that came up in that was trust. And then we deviated off on a slightly different path by asking ourselves, because we have a few wine people at the table, what characterised some big changes in the wine industry? And how come the whole wine industry all got on the same page and made a big change over 10 years? Our conclusion was that there was leadership amongst a number of commercial people who achieved commercial benefit on behalf of the whole industry. Because they had a culture of trust and strong relationships and engagement, they were basically able to crash through on behalf of the whole industry and drag the industry forward. So they were commercial people, institutional people, all the other players in the game. So what characterised all of that was they had a vision, and they were prepared to sort of crash through accordingly because they knew they had the right culture in this industry, they had that right trust, they'd built the relationships, people were prepared to follow them, including grassroots people, to create cross-industry partnerships, and they got away with not being nice because they actually needed action to happen. And so I guess the take-home message out of this whole process, and that's where we got to, the take-home message was, well, if we're going to engage the private sector in this whole extension process, it can't be looked at in isolation. It has to be part of this kind of visioning process. And then those characteristics we've just articulated on behalf of the wine industry are indeed some of the golden rules that will have to be implemented, because if we're going to move forward, it'll be time and we need action.
Yeah. So that's a good table, Lawrence, to sit on? Yes, he said. So, Ian, you'll talk about this later, but these are very good points, and they go beyond the scope of the trial, but they're points that we'll take on. So you might talk about that later. Ross, where are you now? Fantastic. The table up the back. Oh, yeah, over here.
Graham Harris here on
Okay.
behalf of this table here. I guess we focus specifically on one question is what critical issues most need to be addressed, and that's what we focused on, and not so much on these trials. And really what we've come up with is that, and it's been mentioned already, the loss of government sector staff to move into the private sector, so there's just not the people that are coming into the private sector or for them to be employed. So we started talking about, well, what other mechanisms are there to actually ensure that there is a network or a group of young professionals coming through the sector. And I guess I use the example of the rural doctors thing, which is happening in Australia because the same sort of issues occurred there.
Yes.
And maybe we need to think outside the square a bit. And one suggestion from a table from the private sector was maybe we need to engage kids straight out of school and train them and then send them to university and do it externally and be actually working that system. So there's another thought, instead of going through the traditional university system. It's partly involved, but it's a way, a mechanism, because one of the issues is that we don't retain people in the rural area or even get them there.
That's
So
true. Very true.
that's there are a number of other issues, but these all no doubt be captured. But,
Thank
yeah.
Fantastic. Good comments. And 3 more tables to go, I think. Ross, you're going up the back there?
Thanks very much. Jeff Casburn speaking on behalf of the group. We didn't really come up with any priorities between the 4 projects. They were all interesting in their own right, and they all had some issues that no doubt will need to be addressed. We started off talking a bit about the mentee area, because we've got a couple of people on our table that are sort of directly involved with that. And one of the comments was that it's really good to have in that process an actual formal process for that, rather than just people talking about mentoring, and that it's good that there was a formal process. So, there was a comment that said that, you know, it is a big barrier for new entrants and to get a start in a new business as well, and that we shouldn't expect, great improvements in that process, because it is difficult. Being involved in projects is an important comment, but there was one comment that's not that easy now to be involved with projects in terms of research projects. I'm probably guessing more of. Moving into the sort of precision agriculture, and we actually talked about decision agriculture more so than precision agriculture. I know it's slightly different in word, but it probably means a fair bit. And there was discussion about incremental change, and that in livestock it's potentially there's some really good improvements there, but really in that space it's moving so quickly that it's quite scary. And there were some examples given just about different companies and what's happening in that space. So they thought that, you know, it had a lot of promise really. Just quickly, what else do we have in terms of the processing sector? Like, that's a real challenge. Potentially that different industries have different sort of paddock to processor links. And so there's differences in dairy and potentially with beef compared to sheep. And so coming up with ways of doing things there potentially is quite different across the industry sectors. And what else did we quickly discuss? What was the other one? Oh yeah, supply and demand was an issue that comes into play there as well, in terms of supply being king, in terms of processes. What else? It was knowledge. I think that'll do from us.
Well, that's
Thanks.
great. As I said, Ruth, there's a lot of different views and, you know, all coming together. So 2 more tables to run, I think. Yep.
Nikki Reichelt from the University of Melbourne.
Hello, Nikki.
Our table really discussed the trials, across the trials, as a broad approach to the whole trial sector. So 3 main points we made. There was just a bit of concern about the short-term length of the trials, and just a bit of a question about, well, what happens after the trials are finished?
Yeah.
What sort of legacies?
Yeah.
What sort of adoption strategies might be in place if there is a new tool that is being developed. What happens next post-trial?
Yeah.
So that was just one comment and concern. A real positive thing was really liking to see the different RDCs and industries working cross-sectorally together in a trial, per trial. Really interested to see what sort of cross-sectoral learning happens there. And once again, what's the legacy of that cross-sectoral collaboration beyond the trial. But very interested to know how the cross-sectoral engagement and collaboration affects the options and the process that happens within each trial, and trying to get everybody on the same page. And there's an understanding that that takes time, which is possibly why the trials are, just shunting along. We're not moving rapidly, but it's been quite a step-by-step process. Just another observation is that perhaps the approach at this point does seem a little academic and not so commercial context approach, in that there's not necessarily a rapid testing of ideas and adaptation as we go along. There is a sense that perhaps it is following a bit of an academic approach as opposed to what an approach might be in the commercial world. So not a criticism, just an observation.
Could be a bit more organic, Nikki, or...
That's exactly the word that was used.
Fantastic. Thanks very
Okay,
much
thank
for
you.
that. But there's obviously a lot in these trials, a lot to be learned. And the last table... See.
Marg Eyre here from the University of Melbourne as well.
Marg, can I just say, don't forget your evaluation form.
Oh, okay.
Thanks, Marg.
We talked about the knowledge trial and sort of confirmed that the cases that are being investigated are good ones. So the best wool, best lamb and the catalyst project. We then talked about the mentoring or graduate new entrance pathways, and acknowledge that in fact there are other examples out there running concurrently, so particularly one with the Queensland Farmers Federation, so it would be good to make a link there. We agreed that we think humans will still be part of the agricultural landscape in 10 years' time. And we talked in terms of digital agriculture that in the current sort of ever-evolving space, there seems to be an expectation that the end user is always the farmer, but we're recognising that advisors are a big part of that system, and that in fact farmers may not want to do some of the sort of more data crunching type activities associated with digital ag. So they were the main things we talked about, and we talked about a lack of integration currently between digital technologies and tools as well. That's providing real challenge for farmers, but that may provide an opportunity for advisors.
That's good, Mark. That's really good, and it does make sense that if good advisory programs are kind of effectively just people working together to make sense of a situation, obviously service providers have got to be really an audience in that digital age. So. Thanks very much, everyone. That was really good, and there's a lot of points that actually came together there, Ruth, I thought, around outcomes and longevity and complexity of the trials and a number of other things. What I'll do now, ladies and gentlemen, home stretch. We'll ask Ruth to come up and just give us a couple of seconds on basically the opportunities, where do we go next, and then I'll ask Ian to come up and wrap up the session. And I've already been outside and tested the coffee, and it's hot and ready to go. So we're nearly there. Thanks very much, Ruth.
Wow, there is a lot there. Thanks everybody for hanging in so well and being very engaged in all elements, from the institutional arrangements through to things better for farmers and advisors and everything in between. So I do just want to say, obviously, we haven't been able to see all the comments, we've got this huge list of questions Neil has said that there's there. And so I just want to assure you that part of what happens next is obviously all that will be brought together. It is part of what we're trying to find out more about private sector extension. So one of the things that will come from today is those questions. We will answer them and arrange for that on the website and through communications. So sorry we haven't been able to get across all those questions today, but we will as far as we can. So they have been taken on board. And same with the comments that have been made on all the tables, that will be collated and sifted through. So the opportunities to be engaged in the next steps around the project, and Ian Lindley went through sort of the timeline and the scope and boundary of the project. So in that context, I've just been asked to say, well, where are the opportunities for your comments to be taken on board and acted upon relative to what else is happening in the project? So obviously some of the things that you've noted and mentioned does relate to obviously some of the stakeholders of the project. So some of them probably, as you said, exist across the whole system. So it's really great that Tim Lester is here in terms of the chairs of RDCs, that maybe there is a pathway for some of these things that could be discussed strategically at that level. And so definitely from this we could say, you know, these are some of the things that can't be addressed in this project, but would be an area of interest. Definitely what's come out of the discussion will go to the steering committee, which involves the RDCs and the two governments as well. So if there's anything in particular that can be taken up or should be understood, that will occur through us compiling the results of your input today. So in terms of some things that the project itself and what it's doing, so obviously the trials have been presented, and so those comments that you've made about the trials will go into each of those trials and be considered across. So again, to see, well, what, for the limits of what's possible, could we really take on those good comments that you made? Definitely the point that was made just then about the trials and the linking, and then how does that link into the bigger picture issues. I suppose that is actually core to the project design. I mean, it's part of the why there's an expert panel, why there is the stakeholders looking at what's coming out and what's coming up in the trials. So we would hope that for those next 12 months that there is a mechanism there to think about legacy, to think about what hasn't been covered, what's been learnt across trials and amongst the stakeholders. So those aspects, I think, will be picked up in the design. As part of Ian's map today, he did talk about some extension training modules that are part of the project, and so those are to be sort of developed and piloted, and that's another aspect of people that are involved in the trials or have an interest that you can touch base with the project. So I suppose through the mechanisms we would see what should go to the steering committee, what should go beyond, what should be considered in the trials. That's what we'd commit to do. Now, in terms of being kept up to date, do register for the project, the website. There's the postcard there in your pack, and that's the way you can get e-newsletters. Anything, any report can be put up there, and so that's the best way to access it. I suppose in terms of filling out your forms, I don't know, Ian, whether you were going to cover this, but the project has another forum in about a year's time, and so if you have comments about, gee, this is what we'd really like to see at the next one, and this is why we'd come back to continue to engage, we'd like to hear that. So that would be where I'd put it at the moment, Steve, but I say how significant I found your contribution to these issues today, and again, thank you for being here. Thanks.
Thanks, Ruth. That's great. Finish her off, boss.
Thanks, Ruth, and thanks, everybody. One thing we didn't mention was that one of the comments that came in quite regularly, or one of the questions was, can we see the presentations? Can we get a copy of the presentations? The answer is that we'll check with all the presenters, and the website that Ruth mentions that's in your package. That's where, and we've already, some of the presenters have said, sure, no problem. So most of them will be up there. We just have to check with everyone whether they need to be modified in any way. So I think we had about 7 people ask that question, how do we get hold of the presentations? So thank you. Thank you very much for everyone's contribution today. I'd like you to put your hands together for our facilitator today, who not only facilitated today, but made an incredibly significant contribution to the development of the forum and, of course, in facilitating our expert panel. So for Steve, thank you very much for today, Steve. There was a bottle of wine for you, but I think they've all gone. Someone's taken them all, but I'm sure we'll find something for you. For the participants today, thank you very much for your time and input. We certainly appreciate the diversity of the attendance. I was a bit nervous about saying put your hand up if you're a producer farmer, put your hand up if you're this and that. It's really hard when you're getting people organised. There are about 130 people here. I was actually thrilled to see the diversity of the audience when people did ask that question. So that makes our research and your input even more valuable for the project. So thank you very much, and we'll work on that agribusiness bit, but John's gone now, but I did say to John, well, we contacted you to ask people in your organisation, as we did with other agribusiness, so if only one person turns up, we imagine they're representing the whole organisation. So I'm reasonably comfortable that we had 3 agribusiness firms here. For the speakers, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and experiences. It's been invaluable, and the number of people who've obviously latched onto you during the breaks and the number of people who've asked for a copy of the presentations is testimony to how important and valuable your presentations were. So thank you very much. The project planning team, so the project partners, including the Australian government as well. Thank you very much for your efforts, and particularly the forum planning team in getting today organised, in determining what, we have a parameter of private sector extension and stimulating that as the guide of, or the parameter of the program, but we still had to focus a little bit more than that. So thank you very much for all your guidance. And a lot of that guidance also came from the regional forums that were conducted, and as Ruth just mentioned, your guidance today will influence the fact that there is another forum next year, and so we're very keen for you to keep in touch and provide information to us. And don't forget to fill out your blue feedback sheet, and even if there's no box that suits you, scribble where you like, because we're happy, and we do like to see our monitoring and evaluation person and contractor, Jeff Coots, we do like to see him work harder than just getting stuff out of boxes, don't we, Jeff? We like to see you getting those comments and trying to input them. So thank you very much. So while there are set milestones and parameters for this project, which contain the project within a certain within parameters, it is an action research project, and your input today will inform some of the future directions. So it's not. Please don't step out of here today thinking, oh well, that was good, that was interesting, but I'm not sure whether I've had any influence. You certainly have that opportunity. So if you want to go back to your feedback form, along with the comments from your tables, and along with continuing to, a little bit more information can come in electronically. Neil, is there still some of that? Yeah. Keep tweeting. Yeah, thank you. The quality of your input today has been outstanding. It's listening to the tables, reading some of the. I've had the privilege of reading some of the questions and comments that have come in, and it's going to influence this project and inform this project incredibly. So I really do thank you for that. We urge you to keep in touch via the website, which will have a newsletter. There's a quarterly newsletter. So we really do urge you to keep in touch as best possible. I'd also like to, and I hate individualising, but there have been two people who've made an incredible input into putting today on, and that's our communications and logistics team. So Sue Beattie and Alicia Keogh, who've been bouncing around, and they're still in their little posies there. Thank you so much. It's been amazing, your contributions. So I'd like to put my hands together for you. Other than that, I think we're there. So please have safe plane journeys, safe car journeys, and feel free to stay here. There are many of the posters and people will still be around in there. There's a cup of tea there, so we urge you to stay when you can. So thank you very much, and really appreciate your contributions today. Thank you.